Fivefold Pantheon. Ashra, Nakala, Talavar, Valrak, Kalen. But have they told you of its sixth member? Have they ever once dared utter my name again? I was the greatest among them, and they scorned me. For what? To dare speak the truth? This entropic cycle of life and death these mortals are bound by only further to spin this world to its ultimate oblivion. But this is why you have found me. You can see this higher calling. Are you willing to do what it takes to transcend your mortal coils and become something greater? To embrace the grasp of Undeath? I will see you on the other side.
Hello and welcome back to another spooky build time lapse with me, Zaz. Today I'm building the culmination of the last 3 years worth of Halloween builds on my channel, as well as the Pantheon of Azeroth series. Vyz'Shaan, God of Undeath. For those of you who are just here for the block placing, I appreciate your patience. I've been trying to lean more into the storytelling aspect of my videos, and so this video is sort of an experimental step in that direction. In 2022 I made the Sanguine Cathedral, the primary place of worship for the vampiric Church of the Chalice. In 2023, I made the Shannite Necropolis, the resting grounds of the Skeletal Legion of Bone. Last year I made Castle Falkenstrom, the lair of one of many Eternity Cult Lords. These three factions, along with others throughout the world, make up the Shannite religion. Though they differ greatly in theology and practice, they all hold Vyz'Shaan as their ultimate leader who will bring about some sort of salvation to the broken world. Like the other gods of the Pantheon, Vyz'Shaan has a temple. His temple, dubbed the Requiem Hedron, is a massive pyramid-like structure built by the early Shannites during the Age of the Gods. This temple is used in necromantic rituals, of which I will expand on in a bit. I start by making the shapes of the temple. As usual, I wasn't 100% sure how I wanted the shape of the temple to be at the beginning, though I had some rough ideas. I knew I wanted it to be reminiscent of Egyptian pyramids, while also being fairly distinct and fantasy-ish. I also draw some inspiration from Art Deco and Gothic styles. You could call me the Gothic King Midas because I can't help but turn everything into Gothic nowadays. Now I start to design the ritual circle. I wanted to have something similar to a pentagram, but I decided that would simultaneously be 2 on the nose and 2 vanilla, so I looked online for some variants and came across some cool asymmetrical designs that I adapted into this shape. Time for another lore dump. When Vyz'Shaan was a member of the then Sixfold Pantheon, he was not known as the God of Undeath. Rather, he was the god responsible for ferrying souls judged by Talavar to their respective afterlives. During one fateful meditation, however, Vyz'Shaan had a frightening vision. The flames of mortality burned so hot that it consumed the world of Azeroth until nothing remained but emptiness. This portent was so powerful that it left a small fracture in Vyz'Shaan's psyche, a seed of madness that would only continue to grow. When Vyz'Shaan received his vision, he told the Pantheon of the urgency of what he saw. Although Ashra believed that it could be a concern, the other gods were more skeptical, and there was ultimately no consensus on a solution. Embittered by this, Vyz'Shaan took matters into his own hands. He experimented with mortals in an attempt to cure death, and after years of secret research he had developed what he had been looking for, Undeath. However, the other gods eventually caught wind of his vile experimentation and were appalled by it. After much consideration, they came to the decision to strip Vyz'Shaan of his divinity and cast him into the mortal realm until he learned humility. After I finish with the ritual circle, I move on to the corners of the temple, which will each house a balefire brazier and a large floating obelisk. I decorate the top of the obelisk with some smaller skull designs I made for the necropolis. I then have the wild idea to shape the top of the obelisk like a stylized skull. Here I shift around the proportions of the build because I'm still not sure exactly how I want it to look. Now I start to add some player scale details to the temple, such as this wall of Gothic arches and a staircase leading down to the entrance. Here I start making some rough plans as to how I want the interior of the temple to be. I decide to make the inside largely hollow in the middle, with each corner having a walled off section containing a crypt area. I then make these hallway balconies that border the top edge of the interior. Now I sculpt the balefire coming from the ritual circle, the obelisks, and the skull. Balefire is a highly potent necrotic flame that is fueled by the residual ectoplasm of tormented souls. These flames are symbolic of Vyz'Shaan's hubris. He believed that he alone could stop the annihilation of the world, but in truth he was only fueling the flames of apocalypse. Here I make some of the crypt sections of the temple. Because my attention span is so poor, I will not finish this part till much later. And now it's time for some more lore. After Vyz'Shaan was exiled by the Pantheon, he landed in the desert regions, having become what he despised, mortal. No longer possessing divinity, he was no longer recognizable as a god, and he wandered the dunes aimlessly, alone, tired, thirsty, and for the first time in eternity he was truly afraid. When he finally found other people, he tried to explain his situation, but as it turns out these people were bandits and non-believers. As the bandits attempted to finish the ambush, Vyz'Shaan managed to remember his dark magic and siphon the life force of the bandits into himself. All except one, that is. The final bandit, a young man named Malik, was at first confused and scared, but soon realized that this was a divine being and knelt before him, pledging his eternal service. Malik, as he would later be called, will become one of Vyz'Shaan's most faithful Lich Lords. Eventually, Vyz'Shaan found his way to Dejnala Oasis and amassed a following there. Zolazar, patron of the Oasis, was wary of him as he distrusted the Pantheon, but Vyz'Shaan reasoned that he was no longer one of them, and over the years they would develop a camaraderie. This, however, was a ruse on the part of Vyz'Shaan, for he instructed his followers to construct a necropolis far away from Zolazar's prying eyes. Once the necropolis and its crown, the Requiem Hedron, were finished, he lured Zolazar there and bound him to the Hedron. Then, as planned, the Shaanites enacted a ritual. Each of the four main obelisks pulled at one of Zolazar's elements till he could no longer take the strain and shattered. It is said that all the Jinn experienced a fraction of Zolazar's pain at that moment. Then the cultists redirected the magic into Vyz'Shaan, allowing him to regain his divinity as well as access enhanced necroelemental abilities. The Pantheon, having been made aware of what had happened, realized this was war. Now it's time to start working on Vyz'Shaan himself. I start by sculpting his skull-shaped head. I then moved on to making his massive ridged horns with easy edits. It took me a good while to get the horns in the shape and position that I liked. After finishing with the horns, at least for now, I quickly shape his pointy helmet and make a rib design reinforcing it. I then make a smaller skull on his forehead. At this point, I realized that I made the head bigger than I thought, and since I'm silly and started detailing it already, it would be hard to change that without starting over. To make room for a proportionally sized body, I had to adjust the temple a bit, but that still wasn't enough. I then decided to make him have a kneeling position. For his body, I wanted it to look like a macabre display of layers of dead flesh and muscle stretched over his skeleton. Ironically, I use a similar technique to the one I used for Kaelin's tree suit. Now I make his staff. I start with these large bone segments and give it some horns that mirror his own. I then rotate it into place and put a floating skull on top. Once I make his hands and feet, his anatomy is mostly complete. Now it's time for some armor. The first armor piece I make is the breastplate. I wanted it to be almost rib-shaped except for the rib gaps, which will be replaced with these claw marks from these grasping hands on the side. Now I work on his gorget, which I make to look like the maw of a shark or something. Here I work on his protruding spinal cord, complete with spikes. And now it's time for... you guessed it, more lore! War had descended upon the world as Shaanite forces clashed with the Pantheon and their mortal followers. For many years this war would go on, for as strong as the gods and their forces were, the Shaanites had the superior ability to resurrect the dead and suffer few real casualties. The gods realized that if they did not defeat Vyz'Shaan, he would soon become far too powerful to stop. They decided to launch an offensive at one of Vyz'Shaan's temples that served as an undead weapons facility. As planned, Vyz'Shaan appeared as he could not resist the chance to destroy his former kin. As the Shaanites and Azurites clashed on the ground, the gods fought in the heavens. Vyz'Shaan had become so bloated with power that even the 5 gods of the Pantheon could not slay him. One by one, the gods fell to Vyz'Shaan's dark magics until only Ashur was left conscious. Just when it seemed like his triumph was at hand, Vyz'Shaan stopped the gloat, and in that moment Ashra with divine swiftness grabbed his staff and plunged it into his chest. As he lay dying, Vyz'Shaan laughed, for he knew he would be able to return and finish the job. But the Pantheon had developed a plan. Ashra reached out to the dying gods and channeled their power to smite Vyz'Shaan, obliterating his body and sending his spirit to the deepest reaches of the underworld. The gods were each transformed into a magical chain to seal him in his eternal prison. And now back to the build. I make some necromantic symbols to decorate the pieces of his cape that drape over his shoulders. I continue to attach different bits and bobs to the body, such as this tattered loincloth with a spinal cord. I also modified the bullhead from the Kaelin build for his codpiece. Now I design his greaves. I decided to make the most heavily armored parts be reinforced with layers of bone plates. I then etch these bone plates with a skull design. Once I'm finished with the greaves, I rotate them into place and then rinse and repeat with the other armor pieces. Speaking of, the next armor piece is this dragon skull pauldron. I make this classic dragon skull shape and add some curved horns with easy edits. I then make the actual pauldron part. I originally made 2 pauldrons, but I had a hard time fitting them in and making them look nice, so I opted for just the dragon skull one and a smaller spine piece on the other shoulder. I quickly make a plate of Quace armor, or at least I think that's what it's called. Now I make some jagged bolts of arced lightning being channeled by Vyz'Shaan from his Obelisks. The last but perhaps the most complex armor piece I make are the vambraces. I say that because they are deceptively asymmetrical, as they are designed to fit around the anatomy of the forearm. Like the greaves, I make these heavy bone plates, although I do a little bit of a different design this time. Now it's time for the fun part, the texturing. Not that the shaping can't also be fun, but something about seeing your untextured build become textured before your eyes hits differently. So I had this idea earlier to make this spinal collar piece that juts out from under his cape, but I wasn't exactly sure if I wanted to implement it. At this point though, I thought it'd be worth it. After I make the spinal cords, I string out some bits of dead flesh between the 2 spines. On an unrelated note, I'm sure Vyz'Shaan is a wonderfully pleasant guy once you get to know him personally. Now I add some more balefire as well as a bunch of tormented souls he carries around where he goes. And now it's time for a final bit of lore, because this story is not over yet. When Vyz'Shaan's spirit was imprisoned in the underworld, he fell into a deep trance. Though he was no longer fully conscious, he dreamt nonetheless. Over time, certain people began to hear his whispers. He offered a myriad of promises: wealth, power, everlasting life. He did not ask for much in return, only the loyalty of a friend, a little sharing of gospel, and oh, just a little tiny piece of your soul. Over a millennium after his defeat, the chains that bound Vyz'Shaan were beginning to wear. Eventually, a cult of Neo-Shaanites managed to excavate the necropolis and perform the necessary sacrifices to break the chains and resurrect Vyz'Shaan. After using his powers to reconstruct his body out of spare flesh and bone, he wasted no time declaring his righteous crusade to convert the world to his cause. Most believe that he cannot be stopped without divine intervention. There are a few sects of believers in the Pantheon who hold out hope that somehow the gods will return in some shape or form and defeat the Shaanites once and for all. Now it's time to add a few finishing touches to the build. Firstly, I add these slitted eyeballs to the sides of the temple. I then work on making these gold patterns on the side more detailed and elaborate. After that, I texture the gold with noise patterns, and I had the idea to use a gradient of light blocks corresponding with the gold gradient. This will make the lighter parts of the gold glow brighter than the darker parts. Now I thought it would be fun to integrate the old statue of Vyz'Shaan I made for the necropolis into this build as a sort of ornamental statue. I made another floating monolith for it and duplicated it on the other side. I realized that the center of the temple is pretty empty, so I decided to make the core monolith of the temple to house Vyz'Shaan's throne room. As I wanted the whole temple to be accessible, I made sure to add stairs going into and inside of the throne room. Now for the throne room itself, I make a huge throne for Vyz'Shaan, as I imagine that even at player scale he would still be massive. I also make this bony chandelier. I believe I made something like this before at a smaller scale. It took me a bit of time to get right, but I think it looks pretty good. Here I make a smaller ritual circle to go between the original one and the throne room. Okay, one last thing before I call it done. I clean up and finish the stairway leading up the temple. And with that, the build is complete. It's now time for the cinematic.
At long last, I have returned to this world to finish that which I began long ago. To all my loyal subjects who have continued the great work in my absence, you shall be among the first of this new wave to receive the gift of eternity. To all the blasphemers who spit in the face of greatness, who dare try and stand in my way, you shall drown in endless torrents of lightning, balefire, and brimstone. Through flesh and frost, through blood and bone, through sinew and spirit, this new age of Undeath shall not be denied.
Hey, thank you so much for watching my video. I put so much effort into this one, especially the story-related parts, and I really hope that's self-evident. As usual, I haven't pulled the trigger on releasing the downloads for my builds yet, but that's never off the table for the future. Anyways, if you liked the video, tell me what you liked. If you have some constructive criticism, I'm always open to it, just keep it civil please. Anyways, till we meet again, bye.